Most of us would want to have the perfect lineup, meaning that every player is a combination of speed and power, a Willie Mays or a Mickey Mantle. The truth is, though, that you will have on a good club, you may have a couple of three guys that are very well-rounded, but you're going to have to make a decision in your other lineup spots between guys that have one tool versus the other. And how you make that decision, if you really want to get deeper with it, you may want to look at the type of ballpark that you're playing in. You may want to look at the starting pitcher that you're going against. Where do you want to go for defense? Where do you want to go for offense? Do you really feature one versus the other? Do you go for a combination? I think a general rule there is that more games are won by stopping the other club than by overpowering teams. So if you had to make a tough decision, I would go for the defensive player. Now the other thing you want to look at, though, is where does the ball go the most? So you really don't want to have a defensive player stuck in the corner of the field, like in left or right field, for example, and the ball not go there and you sacrifice offense. So one way that you can help is if you have charts that show where teams are hitting your pitching or that particular pitcher, you may want to decide defense versus offense. So definitely the key, traditional up the middle, second base, shortstop, center field, catcher, a defensive player can help win a game quicker than in his offense. But other places, if you can go for offense where the ball doesn't go as often, or the other strategy, which is kind of cute, sometimes you go with the offensive player for the first 4, 5, 6 innings, get the lead, play the defense late to keep the lead. Yeah, setting up a batting order is one of the most fun things a manager has to do, especially if you got some talent to choose between. I think some of the no-nos that you want to avoid is you don't want to make it easy for the other club to manage against you, for example. If you stack your lefts and rights, then if the starting pitcher has any kind of trouble, the other manager has it real easy to relieve against you. Assuming he has lefts and rights, he'll just play the percentages. If you mix it up with a left or right, switch hitters are wonderful. That's why I love switch hitters, because they cause the other side so many problems. That forces them to rethink, and they may not make a relief move for a hitter or two, and that might cost them another run or two. So watch how you stack your hitters. I think another important point in your lineup is you want to complement the styles of the hitters. In other words, there are some real rally stoppers. What are they? Lack of speed. A real strikeout guy are rally stoppers. If you put a bunch of guys who don't run very well together, you're locking up that part of the order unless they hit the ball out of the park, which they don't do very often. You don't run the bases. You don't have much excitement. There's not much you can manufacture. You may have the classic guy and he hits leadoff most of the time, but you really want to talk to your club about everybody having a leadoff man's mentality, because in different innings, they may be the guy that's leading off the inning or hitting with nobody on base and one out. So you want everybody to understand what the leadoff man has to do, and that's get on base more than anything else. Score runs. If you have a true superstar, you want to do several common sense things to let him show his stuff. And that's before and after his at-bat. Before, you want to set the table, so use as many good hitters as you can to create as many run-scoring opportunities, because most good hitters need the chance to show. You can't give them one chance a game and expect them to be productive. So set the table and then protect them. You want somebody behind them that the offense is going to respect, so they just don't take him away from you by unintentionally or intentionally walking him in every crucial situation. And the last thing you want to do is you got to remember that somebody might try to intimidate him, and you always got to be ready to support him and protect him. Whenever you have a chance to play in the postseason, League Championship Series or the World Series, I don't think most people want to mess with their lineup, because you've been playing all year long with the pressure of winning games. They're used to doing that, and it's the old adage about dance with whatever brought you the partner that you've been dancing with all year long. So I would stay with my lineup. I think the crucial things that you want to do for the World Series or postseason is you want to make sure that these guys understand how special the opportunity is, that they've changed their focus from regular season to postseason. It happens real quick, real intensive. So every at-bat could be the championship, and that's the attitude. You want them to take every at-bat and every inning of defense like it's the last inning they're going to play that year. Your pitching rotation, the first part is how do you choose them, who are the guys, and then how do you pitch them. By that I mean most clubs go with a 5-man rotation. Most clubs go with pitchers pitching every 5 days. Because of the breaks in the schedule, your 5th guy becomes a swing guy. He may have to drop out and miss a start so that you can keep as many guys working regular as possible. Usually that's 4. With days off, you may have a guy pitching real well, and the day off would make him pitching on his 6th day rather than his 4th day, so you may want to advance your starting rotation up a day, pitch him a day short of rest from time to time. Other key considerations are try to complement the styles as much as you can. If you have 2 guys that throw over the top with good fastballs, and you have the 3rd guy who throws kind of 3/4 and throws more sinkers and sliders, slip the guy that looks different in between the other 2, because an offense that sees the same guy for 2 days in a row will get comfortable with that style. When you're trying to figure out how long to let a particular guy go, pitch counts can be really important, and there's no one standard because every pitcher is different. Some guys start to feel fatigue at the end of 90 pitches, some guys 110. I would be very careful anytime over 125, because sooner or later your pitcher's going to break if you do that very often. So I'd watch pitch counts, I'd get to know my pitcher. And then the other point that I think is real crucial is if you pitch a guy when he starts to get tired, 2 bad things happen. He starts to risk making mistakes which could cost you that game, and if he doesn't make a mistake, making a guy dig real deep when he's fatigued usually leads to injury, so you lose both ways. Suppose you face a situation where a starter or 2 is injured and having to skip a turn. I think this is really one of those cases during the season. You're going to run into them. You're always going to have slumps and injuries where a key part of surviving and really even thriving is your frame of mind, and make sure the club understands that you look at the part of the glass is half full, not half empty. So the game that you're pitching that day, and maybe your starter called in sick, how do you get by it? If you remember that most hitters despise having to see a different pitcher every time they go to bat. So you just pitch that game that day with your bullpen and figure and get excited that you're going to have different looks to throw at hitters, so you can really mess with the other side's lineup, you can mess with their percentages, and what we have won games with is using 3 or 4 pitchers to pitch the game. One of the real tests for a manager and a pitching coach is how he uses a bullpen. Not just the actual matchup, because there is a lot to knowing what your pitcher does best and matching up against a hitter who really doesn't handle that type of stuff. So that's part of it. But there's another more subtle thing, and that is the number of times you warm guys up. You can be a manager and a pitching coach that panics, and every time the man gets on base, you get the bullpen going, and so they warm up 4 or 5 times. They finally come into the game the 6th time, and they're just gassed. They have nothing left. So you got to be careful with your warm-ups. We chart every time somebody throws. We have 3 different styles. One is just play catch, which just gets you a little bit loose. The second one is get halfway, and the final one is get ready to go in the game. If you can be careful with the get loose and halfway, it's kind of straddling the fence between having the guy sit there, be cold, and really just trying to guard your calls to the bullpen. So there's a kind of a way in between that you can get him throwing a little bit without wearing himself out. It's always a tough call when you see a starting pitcher struggling, and the things that you want to look are his stuff. He obviously doesn't have good stuff, or maybe he has bad location. If it's bad location, you got a little better feel, because you may hang with him a little longer, because once he starts to get his pitches where he's trying to throw them, he'll start getting out. If he's got bad stuff, normally that does not improve as the game goes on. It gets worse. If you have that typical situation where you've got a 2-run lead and you're in the 7th inning and you've got the dynamite closer who's been pitching a lot and he has 3 outs for you, so you really have to restrict him to the 9th inning, you see how important that setup guy is. If he doesn't get you the 6 outs before the 9th, you never get to the closer, you never win the game. So the setup guy has really become more and more important. They've gotten more and more attention. And what you look for more than anything else with a setup guy is something that's an out pitch, something that he can go to that will get him an out in a hurry. Points about the final relievers, if you remember, you're not going to be able to pitch him every day. You try to pitch him with the lead. The more time that you can bring him in the 9th inning to get 3 outs versus having to bring him in the 7th and 8th, the more effective he's going to be for the longer period of time. So we try to restrict our closer to 3 outs. We try to start the 9th inning with him because there's nobody on base and 3 quick outs and he wins. Sometimes you run into a problem where you wait too long to pull the trigger on the closer. You bring him in where there's a lot of problems already developing on the bases. So what happens? Somebody makes an error, there's a blooper, and pretty soon he did his job, but the score is tied, and you wasted that chance. So handling the bullpen is really one of the keys to having a successful season, and those are some of the things you look at. So the dilemma you always have when you use your bench is you've got a certain number of moves to make. When do you make them? If you save them for the end, you may lose a game, and you go into the clubhouse and you've never used the pinch hitters that you could have used, or the pinch runner. If you use them too early, then when you get down to the last part of the game and you have a better opportunity, they're already gone. The point is, you got no crystal ball, so the best thing you can do is just really try to get a feel for the game, and you will sense when you've got a chance to explode, and that's when you want to use the game. So I think you make a mistake saving your top pinch hitter or pinch hitters for the 8th and 9th. Sometimes that opportunity is in the 6th and the 7th. In my opinion, the pinch runner is different than the pinch hitter. Pinch hitter you can use whenever you think it's the best situation. Pinch runner, I would say, for the run that decides. Classic situation, whenever that is, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th inning, score is tied, runner gets on with usually less than 2 outs, maybe perfect leading off the inning. A lot of times you'll have a pitcher that you can run on. Then you use that guy to steal second, so that's just like leading off with a double. Get him over to third, any kind of ball put in play, he's going to be quick enough to score on. So that's how I would use a pinch runner, but understand that most clubs can't afford to have somebody like that. You're really in there real good if your pinch runner can do something else, catch the ball well, or maybe play a position if you really need him to. Generally, I think you want to promote an aggressive, go-for-broke attitude. You're much better off making some outs on the bases because guys are pushing it than being a station, one base at a time team. As far as, so those points apply to all base runners. Doesn't have anything to do with stolen bases. That just means when you hit the ball, run as hard as you can, and when you get on base, be alert to try and go as far as you can when the next guy hits the ball. So take base running seriously. When you do the little finesse things like stealing bases, then is when you really want to factor in the risk of the out versus the benefit of getting the base. And there's things that you use to help you decide that. The speed of the runner, the style of the pitcher. Does he have a good pickoff move? Does he have a slow delivery to the plate? Is the catcher a good thrower? And even it gets real subtle and real specific, like if the guy's a sinker ball versus a high ball pitcher. The high ball pitcher, the catcher just comes out, takes it, throws the guy at it's a real easy reception and set to throw. A sinker baller, you're usually having to stoop over and catch. Then you got to get all the way back up here to the throwing position. You pick up another steps or 2 steps for the good runner. I think the hit and run I would use a lot more, except I've been around so long that people know I like to use it and they pitch out, so you just got to be careful. The other considerations are, does your hitter, is he a swing and miss guy? Obviously that's dangerous. If the runner is real slow, what difference does it make if you know your hitter's going to put it into play? If your hitter is a guy who swings and misses, then you probably want a guy who can run some, so in case you can steal a base if he does swing and miss. But I think more than anything else, the important part about the hit and run is the ball has to be hit on the ground, and you want to understand that every time the ball sneaks through the infield, you're looking at first and third with less than 2 outs, and that is one of the classic run scoring opportunities in baseball. Talked about with a runner on first and second, nobody out, that's a real momentum situation. The offensive team needs to score. The defensive team, if they stop them, it's momentum for them. So the bunt is a way to get that runner to second and third and really help you at least capitalize with it, a mark or maybe 2. I think the other thing about the sacrifice bunt is some guys are not good hitters. And by having them sacrifice and picking up a base, they make an offensive contribution. So for those who really talk the bunt down, I'd be very careful because there is a place for it as long as you don't wear it out and do it too early and too often. I think it's probably better used later. Intentional walk, like other pieces of strategy, is a matter of opinion. Some guys like them, some guys do not. I don't like them a lot. I much prefer the unintentional walk. I like our pitchers to know what they can throw just off the plate, because if you get hitters to chase bad pitches, it's tough for them to make real good contact. So sometimes in an intentional walk situation, we have an unintentional sign. But that is, we just have our catcher set up off the plate, and so you're intentionally walking them, but they swing at those bad pitches and you get the cheap out. The squeeze play is a maneuver that you use when you don't feel your hitter has a real good chance to drive in the run. And what you look for more than anything else is a count that you expect forces the pitcher to be around the plate. You 2-1, 1-0, 2-0, he's thinking throw a strike, and then you get the ball down, squeeze, it's successful. Problem with the squeeze play, there's a lot of risk to it. For one thing, people may pitch out because they're thinking along with you. They know that your hitter is not one that will drive in the run easily. They know that the squeeze may be alive, so they're watching you. The other thing is the pitcher may not be around the plate like you want him to be. He may all of a sudden throw a breaking ball that bounces or a fastball that's unbuntable, and you run yourself right out of the inning. So it's a high-risk play. Most people save it for late in the game. I think one of the ways to use a squeeze is to use earlier in the game where it's not as likely and not as looked for as often. Runner on third base with less than 2 outs, it's one of the classic decisions the manager has to face. You get all kind of opinions about that. And I think more than anything else, you have to look at how much does that runner scoring damage your chance to win the game. And it's just a gut call. Don't fall into the trap that some managers will try to tell you about, well, if it's the first 6 innings, I always play back, and I'll only start considering bringing the infield in the last 3. Truth is that you'll get into games where you just know, I mean, your gut's just screaming that every run is going to be golden. What's that situation? Maybe you're going against their side's top starter who hasn't given up a run in a month. Well, you can't expect that day runs are going to really come in bunches, so every run you give up is real dear. In my opinion, extreme defenses burn you more than they help you, so I usually stay away from them. But you do have one situation, and it usually follows the real power, swing for the fence or nothing type hitter who's very pull conscious. Then you can shift your defense. The big thing you want to look at is he the kind of guy who will alter his swing depending on the game situation. I think the classic is 2 outs, nobody on, is he's thinking one swing, get a run on the board. So pull your shift and play him to pull, take as much of that field away from him as possible. But suppose now you've got a runner on second base with 2 outs and you do the same shift defense. Say he's a right-hand hitter, everybody's on the left side of the field, and now all he's got to do is just nudge the ball to the right side of the diamond and he's going to drive that run home. You have to try to make a judgment about whether he's a guy who's got enough sense and is willing to take one less home run swing in the season to try to pick up the RBI. Some guys will, some guys won't. But I think the shift has a place if used sparingly, and try to know your hitter in game situations. When your club is in a bunt defense situation, you'll have the alternative of having one of your infielders, especially your third baseman, charge the bunter. And it can be very effective as long as you do it in an unpredictable way. In other words, if they know that you're going to do it every pitch, they can just let the guy hit away, or if you're facing a first and second, nobody out, as your third baseman leaves his position, the guy on second can start stealing third and maybe beat your shortstop who's going over there to cover. So I think there's a place for it. You have to really feel like the bunter is going to bunt, and you can't use it extensively. It's a risky play because most teams teach their bunter with the bunt sign, if they see the guy charging, to pull the bunt back and try what they call it butcher boy. They'll try and swing through it, and if he does touch it, there's a lot of ways for that ball to get by the charging third baseman. So it's a play that you can use for a pitch or two occasionally. I wouldn't overuse it. The decision to challenge or pitch around a hitter is one of the most important game decisions that a manager has to make. And as long as you understand that the general rule that you want to preach to your pitcher and catcher and even to your team is, we're going to be aggressive, 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 we're going to go after, we're going to challenge, 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 then you understand that once in a while it does make sense to be discretionary. It may be that the guy is the big hitter who always is a tough out. Maybe a guy like Frank Thomas, the MVP the last couple years. No matter how he's swinging, he is such a threat. Don't ever underestimate him. It may be somebody who's real tough against that pitcher. And even though he may not be a 350 hitter, maybe he's a 250 hitter, but his stats may be something like in 40 lifetime at-bats, he's got 28 hits with big home run and RBI production. You may want to pitch around or not challenge that guy. And then the other thing that I think that you face sometimes, you'll face a guy who's hot right then and there. He may be seeing the ball real well. Maybe that game or might be that series. So if you're watching closely, it may be that this one game in April, you're going to be very careful with this guy in this situation. So you want to have a sign to pitch around. The big thing that you want to try to do with a pitch out is use it when you have a feel that the other side has gotten into some kind of pattern. You try to get into their mind. If you know that the manager on the other side is aching to do something aggressive, he's got a decent runner, he's got a batter at the plate who handles the bat real well, you know it's likely, then you just try to read the pitch count and the situation, and you call the pitch out yourself. So I think the big factors are be ready to call it at any count. That's part of the intimidation factor, but you have to really try to anticipate what the other side is trying to do. Once you get into the postseason, a lot of your strategy doesn't really change in the sense that all of a sudden, boy, it's really important to score runs, so we're going to come up with this trick or that trick, or it's really important to shut the other club up, so we're going to come up with this new magic way to prevent them from crossing the plate. It's pretty much repeating stuff that you've done all year long because you won games by scoring key runs and stopping key runs. I think the big point that I've learned over the years, when you get into the postseason, just like other pressure games, be aggressive. Some people will have a tendency when the pressure's on, like the postseason, to be tentative and sit back waiting for things to happen. I think it's real important to be aggressive first. If you can get over the hurdle of the players knowing it's a competition, not an exhibition, your next dilemma is how do you play everybody and still be protected late in the game in case you have extra innings? And that's a real tough one. So to me, it's just one of those examples where you have some competing factors and considerations, and what you don't want to do is just throw your hands up and say, hey, I'm doing the best I can, without really trying to get it all done. So to me, I try to play as many guys or everybody that I can, be competitive, be entertaining, and still win the game. And I don't concede any of those things in an all-star experience, except that you do have a responsibility at the end of the game to save a hitter or a pitcher or two, unless you've got a big lead and you know the game is going to be over. The 3 games that I managed, each game was won by 2 runs, so I had to save somebody, and then you'd have to explain to the player later on. I really think it would be better if they changed the rules a little bit to expand the roster, and also to allow you to bring back a player or 2 if you win extra innings. That would allow everybody to play, and they should. September call-ups of your younger players, I think, is a matter of perspective. And it depends on whether you've got a winning, contending club or a club that's just playing out the season. If you're a losing club, you can make something positive out of September by taking a look at some guys who will be a part of your future. And I think the only thing that you can make legitimate there is an opportunity for a young player to, say, play in 20, 25 games, pick up 75 to 100 at-bats. Then you can say what you saw in September was legitimate. But if you've got a ball club that's contending and you've played for 5 months with 25 guys and all the relationships and the chemistry that's developed, you've got to be very careful in September that you don't add a lot of young players, and it'll get kind of noisy and it'll distract concentration, and pretty soon you've disrupted your chemistry. So if you're a contending ball club, I would really just add for need. You want to have a couple, 3 pitchers that protect you. You want to have a specialty player or 2 that you weren't able to afford before because of the limits of 25, but I would not overpopulate my roster. If you're not in contention, you bring up as many guys as you can realistically give opportunities to, and make sure everybody understands that the true September look is built on several pitching appearances or 75 to 100 at-bats. You've got to use your whole bench and all your bullpen. Otherwise, you will get to the heat of the summer, and your everyday players, the 9 or 10 guys that are playing all the time, they'll be so gassed that they won't have anything left to finish. And then your bench players will be so out of shape and out of touch with the touch-feel part of the execution game, they can't help you if you need them in an emergency. So I think you have to use all the roster. I do think you have to experiment some early, and I think you have to divide the season between the first 2 months, the middle 2, and the last 2. The first 2 is a lot of enthusiasm to start the season, and you just got to get into the season and get into a routine. The last 2, the end is in sight, especially if you're a contender, and the motivation takes care of itself. The middle 2 are usually real drag, push, every mechanism you can to keep your club excited to get through it. So it's a real test. It's more a marathon than a sprint. If you remember that, you recognize how important it is to pace yourself. Well, there are some real fine points that could change depending on the ballpark. The most obvious ones that we've all heard, Yankee Stadium with the short porch in right field. If you have a left-hand starter, you can try to nullify what usually is a lot of left-hand Yankee power. So that is one. You want to have them hitting to the big part of the park, which is anywhere from right center over to left field. You get to Fenway Park and the monster in left field. Yes, except that you got to be careful with what the lesson that you learn there. Most of the lessons you learn in Fenway is if you pitch out over the plate so that they will hit the ball over to right field, what they end up doing, they crowd the plate and they hook that ball into the screen. So most people have success in Fenway Park by pitching right-handers inside. So you've got to be careful with the adjustments you make. I think the point is you should be aware of what's different about the park. A turf field, you want to do some things different with your pitching and your defense when you're playing on turf versus grass, but be careful what the adjustment is because you may do something that makes the situation worse rather than better. When I was asked what it's like to work on a video game, the impression that I have, the most significant impression is comparing it to how I feel about guys that work in professional baseball. Because there's only 28 clubs, and whether you're in uniform or you work for an organization in the office scouting, whatever it is, you have a certain feeling among yourselves because you know the game and you love the game, and there's conversations that you have and you kind of share experiences that nobody else has. When you meet the general public, you may have people that really love the game, but they don't have the combination of knowing the game. And to know this game is to really love it. And I'm leading into saying that in all my experience in over 30 years of baseball, the crew at Stormfront is as close to being part of the major league fraternity as anybody I've ever been around because they love it like other people love it, but they know it like those of us in the game know it. And this goes through for everybody that I've met with them. So it's really been a neat experience because I always feel like I'm just around baseball people that understand that the deeper you go with this game, the more fun it is and the more you appreciate it.